Nobody remembers the names of the producers who laughed that morning. Nobody remembers the expensive suits they wore, the polished shoes that echoed across the studio floor, or the confident smiles on their faces. But everyone remembers the young man wearing the faded cowboy hat. And everyone remembers what Elvis Presley said to him. Because sometimes history is not written by the loudest applause. Sometimes it begins with the cruelest laughter. Los Angeles had already awakened beneath a pale golden sunrise. The streets buzzed with classic cars, newspaper vendors shouted the day's headlines, and the city breathed with the confidence of a place where dreams were born every single day. But dreams were also buried there. Every morning, hundreds of hopeful singers walked through the doors of RCA Records, believing destiny was waiting inside. Most walked back out, forgotten. On that morning, one more unknown young man climbed the worn concrete steps toward the famous recording studio. His name was Ethan Carter. He had traveled all the way from a tiny farm outside Amarillo, Texas. Everything he owned fit inside one weathered brown suitcase. Inside it were only a few neatly folded shirts, an old notebook filled with songs written during lonely nights beneath endless Texas skies, a family photograph whose edges had begun to fade, and one carefully wrapped harmonica his late father had given him when he was only a little boy. His clothes looked old. His boots carried dried Texas dust. His faded denim jacket had been repaired so many times that each stitch told its own story. The cowboy hat resting on his head wasn't fashionable. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't even perfectly shaped anymore. But Ethan never traveled without it. It had belonged to his father. The train ride to Los Angeles had lasted for days. During the journey, he barely ate. He couldn't afford to. Every dollar mattered. Every coin in his pocket represented another hour of hard labor beneath the burning Texas sun. He remembered repairing broken fences while thunderstorms rolled across the plains. He remembered feeding cattle before sunrise. He remembered falling asleep exhausted after working until darkness covered the fields. Every blister on his hands had paid for this journey. Every sacrifice had bought him one single chance. Only one. As he stood outside RCA Records, his hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped the folded invitation letter. The words printed across the page were becoming blurry, not because the ink had faded, because tears filled his eyes. He quietly whispered the sentence he had repeated throughout the entire journey. "Please, let today be enough." Closing his eyes, another memory rushed into his heart. His mother stood beside the wooden porch of their farmhouse. The wind gently moved her gray dress while she held both of Ethan's hands. Her face looked tired from years of hardship, yet her smile never disappeared. She placed something inside his palm. It wasn't money. She had none left. Instead, she folded his fingers around a tiny silver cross. "If the whole world tells you that you aren't good enough," she smiled through tears, "don't let your own heart become one of those voices." Ethan had hugged her tighter than ever before. "I'll make you proud." She kissed his forehead. "I already am." That had been the last time he saw her. The memory vanished as the studio door slowly opened. Inside, the atmosphere felt completely different from the quiet countryside Ethan had known all his life. Bright recording lights reflected from spotless white walls. Massive microphones stood like monuments waiting for greatness. A glossy black grand piano rested silently in the center of the room. Behind thick glass windows, sound engineers adjusted expensive equipment. The air smelled of fresh coffee, polished wood, cigarette smoke, magnetic recording tape, and nervous ambition. Everything felt larger than life. Everything felt intimidating. Several young performers waited on wooden chairs along the hallway. Unlike Ethan, they looked confident. Elegant suits, perfect hairstyles, shiny leather shoes. Many carried expensive guitar cases. Some casually practiced scales. Others joked loudly, pretending they weren't terrified. The moment Ethan entered, conversation stopped. Eyes slowly turned toward him. Then someone quietly chuckled. Another joined. Within seconds, soft laughter spread through the room. One producer leaned toward another. Did he lose his way to a cattle auction? Another laughed. I've seen better-dressed janitors. Someone pointed toward Ethan's worn boots. Those boots probably sing better than he does. The room erupted with laughter. Ethan lowered his head. He pretended not to hear them. But every word landed like another stone placed upon his shoulders. A receptionist handed him a clipboard. She barely looked at him. Name? Ethan Carter. Experience? He hesitated. I've mostly sung at church, county fairs, and around the farm. She raised one eyebrow. That's all? Yes, ma'am. She scribbled something without expression. You'll be called. Hours passed. One singer entered, another left smiling, another walked out crying. Some celebrated, others quietly disappeared forever. Every time the heavy recording room door opened, Ethan's heartbeat grew faster. He rehearsed his song silently. Again, again, again. His palms became soaked with sweat. His throat grew dry. Finally, the assistant stepped into the hallway. Ethan Carter! Time stopped. He slowly stood. His knees felt weak. Every step toward the recording room echoed louder than the last. The enormous studio suddenly seemed impossibly silent. 5 producers sat behind a long wooden table. Not one smiled. One adjusted his glasses. Another glanced at Ethan's clothes before looking away. The oldest producer lazily flipped through Ethan's application. So, he sighed. Texas. Yes, sir. Farm boy? Yes, sir. You've never professionally recorded before? No, sir. The producer exchanged amused looks with the others. One quietly muttered, We'll keep this short. More laughter. Ethan heard it. He simply swallowed. The sound engineer signaled toward the microphone. You may begin whenever you're ready. The giant microphone stood alone beneath a bright overhead spotlight. It suddenly looked less like a microphone and more like a judge. Ethan slowly approached it. His boots echoed across the wooden floor. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. His fingers shook uncontrollably. He closed his eyes. His mother's face appeared again. His father's old hat rested firmly upon his head. He inhaled deeply, opened his mouth, and nothing came out. Silence. The producers exchanged glances. One sighed dramatically. Another rolled his eyes. Someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. I knew it. More laughter. Ethan tried again. Still nothing. His breathing became uneven. His vision blurred. Panic gripped his chest. He could feel every person in the room staring at him, waiting, judging, watching him fail. His throat locked completely. The words he had practiced 1,000 times disappeared. Not a single note escaped. Only silence. Painful, humiliating, crushing silence. One producer closed Ethan's file. I think we're finished. Another nodded. No point wasting everyone's morning. Someone else chuckled. Back to Texas. The words shattered something inside Ethan. He looked at the microphone one final time, then slowly lowered his head. A tear slipped onto the polished wooden floor. Without saying a word, he reached for his old cowboy hat, turned toward the exit, and took his first step away from the dream he had spent his entire life chasing. Just before his trembling hand reached the studio door, the handle slowly turned from the outside. The heavy door creaked open. No one inside knew that the next few moments would become one of the most unforgettable stories ever whispered through the halls of RCA Records. And the man standing in that doorway was about to change Ethan Carter's life forever. The recording studio fell into complete silence. No one moved. No one even breathed. The heavy wooden door remained half open as sunlight from the hallway stretched across the polished floor. Then, a familiar pair of black leather shoes stepped inside. Every producer immediately stood up. The sound engineer froze with one hand still resting on the recording console. The receptionist outside slowly peeked through the glass window. Nobody had expected him to arrive that morning. Elvis Presley had not been scheduled to visit RCA Records. He had simply stopped by after finishing another recording session across town, hoping to hear a few new voices before returning home. But the moment he walked through the hallway, he heard laughter. Not joyful laughter, cruel laughter. The kind that crushes a dream before it has the chance to breathe. Elvis looked around the room. The producers quickly forced polite smiles. One of them stepped forward. "Mr. Presley, what an unexpected honor." Elvis didn't answer. His blue eyes quietly scanned every face in the room until they stopped on the young man standing beside the door. The faded denim jacket, the dusty boots, the trembling hands, the old cowboy hat, and the tears Ethan was desperately trying to hide. For several long seconds, Elvis simply looked at him. Then something changed in his expression. His confident smile disappeared, because he had seen those eyes before, not in Ethan, but in himself. Suddenly, memories he had not visited in years came rushing back. A young truck driver from Memphis, an awkward teenager whose clothes never fit quite right, a nervous boy who had walked into his first audition believing he wasn't good enough, the people who had laughed, the doors that had been closed, the voices that had whispered, "He'll never make it." Elvis remembered every one of them. He remembered sitting alone after failed auditions, wondering if everyone else was right. He remembered praying that someone, just one person, would believe in him. Looking at Ethan felt like looking into a mirror from years ago. Without saying a word, Elvis slowly walked across the studio. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the room. Nobody dared interrupt him. He stopped only a few inches away from Ethan. The young man quickly wiped his eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Presley." Elvis tilted his head. "For what?" "I wasted everyone's time." "You haven't sung a single note." "I couldn't." "You were scared." Ethan looked down. "I think maybe they're right." The words barely escaped his lips. "I'm not supposed to be here." Elvis gently placed one hand on Ethan's shoulder. His voice became almost a whisper. "Tell me something." Ethan looked up. "When was the last time you sang because it made your heart happy?" Ethan opened his mouth, but no answer came. Elvis smiled sadly. "I know." He slowly removed Ethan's old cowboy hat, carefully brushed away a little dust with his sleeve, then placed it back onto the young man's head exactly the way it had been before. "You've spent the last hour trying to impress strangers." Ethan remained silent. "But that's not why you started singing." The words struck him like lightning. Elvis turned toward the producers. "May I ask all of you a question?" No one answered. "When this young man walked into this room," he slowly looked around, "what did you notice first?" Silence. His clothes, his boots, his hat, or the music inside him? Every producer lowered their eyes. None of them wanted to answer, because they already knew. Elvis nodded quietly. I thought so. He walked toward the microphone, lifted it from its stand, turned back toward Ethan, then gently placed it in front of him. The studio had become so quiet that the soft hum of the recording machines sounded deafening. Outside the control room window, assistants had stopped working. Secretaries stood in the hallway. Even janitors quietly gathered near the open door. Nobody wanted to miss what was happening. Elvis leaned closer. Only Ethan could hear the next words. When I was younger, he whispered, there were days I almost quit. Ethan stared at him in disbelief. I thought the world had already decided who I was. Elvis smiled faintly. But I learned something. He tapped Ethan's chest with 2 fingers. The greatest songs are never sung from here. He pointed toward the microphone. They're sung from here. His hand rested over Ethan's heart. Tears immediately filled Ethan's eyes. Elvis looked directly into them. I don't want you to sing for these producers. He slowly shook his head. I don't want you to sing for RCA. Another pause. I don't even want you to sing for me. The room remained perfectly still. Then Elvis asked one quiet question. Who's waiting for you back in Texas? Ethan's lips trembled. My mother. What did she tell you before you left? The room disappeared. The studio disappeared. The producers disappeared. Only one memory remained. His mother, standing on the old wooden porch beneath a gray Texas sky, her tired hands holding his face, her gentle smile hiding years of sacrifice. Her voice, soft, warm, unforgettable. No matter what happens, don't ever stop singing. A tear rolled down Ethan's cheek. Elvis saw it. Then he smiled. There was no pity in that smile, only understanding, only belief. He stepped back, raised the microphone toward Ethan one final time, and in a voice so calm that every soul inside the building would remember it for the rest of their lives, he said, Then don't sing for us. Another pause. Sing for the woman who never stopped believing in you. The sentence echoed through the studio. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. It was as if time itself had stopped. Ethan slowly closed his eyes. His breathing steadied. The shaking in his hands began to disappear. His shoulders relaxed. For the first time since arriving in Los Angeles, he forgot about the producers. He forgot about the expensive studio. He forgot about failure. He forgot about fear. In his heart, he was no longer standing inside RCA Records. He was back on the old wooden porch in Texas. His mother was smiling. The evening wind carried the scent of fresh hay across the fields. His father was tuning an old guitar. The sun was setting behind endless golden farmland. He could hear crickets. He could hear home. A single deep breath filled his lungs. His fingers tightened around the microphone. The producers exchanged uncertain glances. Even Elvis became completely still. Everyone in the room knew. The next sound Ethan Carter made would either end his dream forever or begin a story the world would never forget. Ethan closed his eyes. The studio disappeared. The producers disappeared. The fear disappeared. There was only one face left in his mind. His mother, standing on the porch of their little farmhouse beneath a wide Texas sky, smiling with tired eyes that had never stopped believing in him. A slow breath escaped his lungs. then another. The room became so quiet that even the gentle hum of the recording tape sounded loud. Every producer leaned forward. The sound engineer instinctively rested one finger above the record button, afraid to blink. Outside the glass window, more employees quietly gathered in the hallway. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared interrupt the silence. Then Ethan sang. The first note barely rose above a whisper. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't powerful. It was honest. The sound carried years of loneliness, years of rejection, years of waking before sunrise to mend fences while dreaming about a stage he had never seen. The second line came stronger. His voice no longer trembled. It began to fill the studio with something no expensive lesson could ever teach. Truth. Every word sounded like a page torn from his own life. He sang about endless highways, about empty pockets, about fathers who leave behind old hats instead of fortunes, about mothers whose prayers become the light that guides their children through darkness. The melody wrapped itself around every soul inside the room. Nobody looked at his clothes anymore. Nobody noticed the worn boots. Nobody cared about the faded jacket. They only heard the young man standing behind the microphone. His voice continued to grow, not because he was forcing it, but because every painful memory became another note. Every sacrifice became another lyric. Every tear became another harmony. The studio no longer felt like a recording room. It felt like a church. One producer quietly removed his glasses and wiped his eyes. Another slowly lowered his head, ashamed of the laughter from only minutes earlier. The receptionist outside covered her mouth with both hands. The janitor standing in the hallway stopped pushing his cleaning cart. A delivery driver carrying heavy boxes stood frozen in the doorway. People who had never met Ethan suddenly felt as though they had known him their entire lives. The song reached its chorus. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Its power came from something far greater than volume. It came from hope. The final verse spoke of one promise, a promise made to a mother on a quiet Texas porch. "I'll make you proud." When Ethan sang those words, his voice cracked, not because he had lost control, because his heart could no longer carry the weight of everything he felt. Tears rolled freely down his face, but he never stopped singing. Neither did anyone ask him to. Even Elvis lowered his head. For a brief moment, memories of his own mother filled his heart. He knew exactly what Ethan was feeling. He had lived it. The final note floated gently through the studio. It lingered in the air. Then, silence. No applause, no movement, nothing. Only the soft spinning of the recording tape. Seconds passed. 1, 2, 3. No one could speak. It felt as though everyone feared that making a sound would destroy the beauty of what had just happened. Then a single pair of hands began to clap. Elvis Presley. Slowly, respectfully. One clap, then another. The sound echoed through the silent room. A producer stood, then another. The sound engineer stood. The receptionist stood. The assistants stood. Within moments, every person inside the studio was on their feet. The applause grew louder, and louder, and louder. Some people smiled through tears, others cried openly without embarrassment. The very same room that had mocked Ethan Carter only minutes earlier now celebrated him with the longest standing ovation many employees had ever witnessed. One producer slowly walked toward Ethan. His hands trembled. His voice shook with regret. "I'm sorry. Ethan looked at him quietly. The producer continued, "I judged your clothes before I listened to your heart." Another producer stepped forward. "So did I." One by one, every person who had laughed came to shake Ethan's hand. Not because he had become famous, not because he had signed a contract, but because they had witnessed something unforgettable: character, courage, truth. The sound engineer carefully removed the master recording tape from the machine as though he were holding something priceless. He looked toward Elvis. "I've recorded thousands of singers." His eyes were still wet. "I've never heard anything like that." Elvis smiled. "No," he quietly replied. "You heard something better than a great singer. You heard a man telling the truth." He walked over to Ethan once more. Without saying a word, he gently straightened the old cowboy hat resting on the young man's head, exactly as a father might. Then he looked him in the eyes. "Never replace this hat." Ethan blinked in confusion. Elvis smiled. "One day people will ask why you still wear it. They'll think it's your trademark." He gently touched the brim. "But you and I will know. It reminds you where your voice came from." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. "I don't know how to thank you." Elvis softly shook his head. "When you become successful," he said, "find someone who's standing where you stood today. Believe in them before the world does. That's how music lives forever." A recording contract was placed on the table. Ethan stared at it without moving. Hours earlier, he had been preparing to leave through that same door, believing his dream had ended. Now, the dream had finally begun. Months passed. His first single climbed the country music charts, then another. Concert halls became theaters. Theaters became arenas. Arenas became sold-out stadiums, stretching from California to New York. People everywhere wanted to hear the farm boy with the old cowboy hat. But fame never changed him. Every performance began the same way. He walked onto the stage wearing the same faded hat. The lights dimmed. He looked toward the sky, closed his eyes, and silently whispered, "This one's for you, Mom." 20 years later, Ethan Carter had become one of America's most beloved country artists. His songs inspired millions. His concerts sold out within hours. His voice had become part of American music history. One evening, during a televised interview watched across the country, a journalist smiled and asked the question everyone had wondered for years. "Mr. Carter, out of everything you've accomplished, what was the moment that truly changed your life?" The audience became quiet. Ethan slowly removed the old cowboy hat. Its edges were worn even more than before. He looked at it for a long time. A gentle smile appeared. Then he looked toward the audience. "It wasn't the day I signed my first record deal." A pause. "It wasn't my first #1 song." Another pause. "It wasn't winning awards." His eyes filled with tears. "The day that changed my life was the day I was ready to walk away." The audience listened in complete silence. I believed everyone who laughed at me. I believed I wasn't good enough. But then, he looked toward the ceiling as though remembering someone standing just beyond it. One man walked through a door. He didn't hear my song. He heard my silence. A tear rolled down his cheek. He looked at a frightened farm boy that nobody believed in, and chose to believe anyway. His voice broke. That man was Elvis Presley. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then the entire audience rose to its feet. Thousands of people stood together. The applause seemed endless. Many were crying, others simply smiled, because they finally understood something greater than music. Talent can open a door. Hard work can keep it open. But sometimes, a single act of kindness changes the course of another person's entire life. Years after Elvis Presley was gone, Ethan visited Graceland alone. He carried no cameras, no reporters, no security, only his old cowboy hat. He quietly placed it beside a bouquet of white flowers. The wind moved gently through the trees. Ethan smiled through tears. I kept my promise. He stood there for a long time, then whispered the words he had carried in his heart for decades. You didn't just save a singer. You saved the part of me that was about to stop believing. As he walked away, the morning sunlight broke through the clouds. The old cowboy hat rested firmly on his head, exactly where Elvis had placed it all those years before. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy any person can leave behind. Not the records they sell, not the awards they win, not the fame they achieve, but the life they change by believing in someone. At the exact moment the rest of the world stops believing. And sometimes, history is not made by the person standing in front of the microphone. Sometimes, history is made by the person who quietly says, "Sing," for the one who never stopped believing in you.